Arizona is home to 22 tribal nations and more than 340,000 Native Americans. Arizona State University builds on more than 6 decades of working and partnering with tribal nations and communities. Many of our Native faculty incorporate Indigenous knowledge systems in seeking solutions through a process of community engagement that respects and honors traditional ways of thinking. Together, we are creating community solutions leading to a more equitable future.
This is Indian Country Today.
Esquili, yes, thank you for joining us. I'm Patty Tawahungva. A move to protect Native children is underway in New Mexico. Pueblo governors held a news conference on Friday calling for the removal of a state administrator who allegedly made disparaging and racist remarks about Native Americans. Rachel Gugel is the director of the state's Legislative Education Committee. According to the Santa Fe New Mexican, Gugel has been documented by her staff making a comment at a meeting on the Jicarilla Apache Nation saying, quote, "It's not like making beaded sandals is going to improve student outcomes." Gugel had previously been under investigation regarding similar allegations and was being investigated by an attorney hired by state officials. The findings were presented in a recent report, but only 10 state legislatures have seen it. Pueblo governors say they want to see the document.
No tribal leader should have to fight endlessly to correct this line of wrongs. That policy, racial injustice, and systemic inequities. Unfortunately, my friends, this is the reality for Indigenous people today.
Gugel's role includes developing policy recommendations on law and funding for the public education of New Mexico's children. Along with the Pueblo governors, the Navajo Nation and both Apache nations in New Mexico are also calling for her removal. She did not respond to a request for comment. It was reported that she sent a letter of apology to tribal leaders last week. Indian Health Services is announcing its new chief medical officer. Dr. Loretta Christensen is Navajo. She will serve as IHS's lead expert on medical and public health topics. Dr. Christensen began her career with IHS as a general surgeon and served as the chief medical officer for the Navajo area IHS for 4 years. She also served as the chief medical officer at the Gallup Service Unit for 3 years. IHS Acting Director Elizabeth Fowler says they are looking forward to having her experience and expertise. The federal agency provides health services to more than 2 million American Indians and Alaska Natives. Lawmakers are threatening to withhold major funds from all tribes over the treatment of descendants of freedmen. The House Committee on Financial Services held a hearing to discuss the Native American Housing Assistance and Self-Determination Act. The federal program provides assistance to tribal governments to support affordable housing and infrastructure. Included in the draft is a provision to give full citizenship rights to freedmen before any federally recognized tribe receives housing assistance. Freedmen are descendants of black slaves, some married into tribes. The subcommittee heard testimony from Marilyn Vann. She's the president of the group Descendants of the Freedmen of the 5 Civilized Tribes. Vann says freedmen experience poverty and barriers to housing at higher rates than other Native Americans.
Tribal governments receive monies for the housing programs, but the majority of freedmen are excluded. I ask you include the treaty obligation language in the final bill and support its passage in the full House.
Cherokee Principal Chief Chuck Hoskins testified, saying tribal access to federal housing funds should not be tied to freedmen rights. A stamp featuring an Alaska Native symbol is now available for purchase. The stamp highlights the Tlingit culture with a drawing of a raven. According to Tlingit culture, the raven discovered that a clan leader kept boxes with the sun, moon, and stars inside them. The raven assumed a human form to share those items with the world. The stars were in the last box the raven opened, and the raven did everything in its power to hold on to as many stars as possible while trying to turn back into a bird. The artist who designed the stamp is Rico Whirl, and according to Sea Alaska Heritage Institute, this is the first stamp by a Tlingit artist. The Postal Service plans to feature the story behind the stamp on social media. Well, Christmas came early to Tohono O'odham students this year. Former NBA All-Star AC Green brought his foundation's Christmas in July program to Sells, Arizona. Students were surprised with toys, board games, lunchboxes, and water bottles. This drive-through event is a joint project between the Tohono O'odham Nation and partnership with Native Americans. The nonprofit serves Native Americans living on remote and poor reservation areas throughout the Southwest and Northern Plains. This was one of many stops for the AC Green Foundation. And those are the headlines from Indian Country Today. I'm Patty Thalahungva. Walter Lamar is on today's show to help answer the question everyone is asking.
Where were the police as protesters stormed the United States Capitol on January 6th? Last week, the nation heard from 4 officers about the January 6th Capitol insurrection. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi named a select committee after efforts to create a bipartisan commission failed. We turn now to Walter Lamar, who, to break this down for Indian Country, he founded Lamar Associates in 2005 to assist tribes and organizations with law enforcement and crisis management. Welcome back, Walter.
Well, thanks, Mark, and it's always a pleasure to be here on the Voice of Indian Country, so thanks for inviting me.
Let me start with the big picture. We're now hearing more and more about what happened on January 6th, and many are actually describing this as a failed coup attempt, in addition to being an insurrection. From your perspective, kind of what's the big picture that we should be thinking about?
Well, you know, and I when I was invited, I kind of hearkened back to the January 7th when I was here with you, and we talked about the day after the riot at the Capitol, and it was all fresh, and we didn't have all of the information in front of us. And I think as I looked back and reviewed what we talked about that day, one of the things that I probably, after seeing the hearings, that I probably mischaracterized was the valor of the individual officers that were there working as hard as they could, giving it everything they could, giving it their all to protect the Capitol. And when we talked about it in those early hours, I think we missed that because we didn't see it. After hearing their testimony, it was riveting. And it brought back memories for me. In the late 80s in San Francisco, I was an FBI agent, and we worked in the federal building downtown, and the federal building always seemed to be the center of protest, a center of activity in that regard. And my partner and I got trapped in a crowd one day of thousands of people, and they recognized and were able to identify who we were. And I know exactly what that feels like, being attacked by hundreds of people and everybody lashing out, striking out. So it just brought that back when I listened to that testimony. But what we have is we know the outcome of that day. What we don't know, and what I'm hoping for, is that this investigation will look deeper into what created the atmosphere, what created this to happen, and the criminality, the potential criminality. And we saw the criminality of the mob. We know what that looks like in great detail. What we're not as clear on is the criminality of those in positions that may have collaborated and conspired with these rioters to allow their entry into the Capitol, facilitate their entry. And likewise, we don't know exactly now, was it that criminal conspiracy and those types of crime, or was it simply performance and a lack of performance from those that were tasked with protecting the Capitol?
In a law enforcement investigation of this such, there's so much in the record that with a subpoena, but you can actually get access to. What are kind of the next steps for investigators to uncover that planning?
Well, being able to recognize and uncover that is just as you suggested. Unlike days of old, where there wasn't this vast store of data and records to be able to go back and take a look at. Now you can go back and look at individual texts, communications that are now made a matter of record, emails. And as the riot was transpiring, I know for a fact that officers were texting friends and family, and they were talking about some of their commands and orders and what was going on. So as we look at this and we're looking at that criminal element and that conspiracy, then we're looking at the performance that occurred that day. So we have to look at the leadership and say, why weren't the very basic things, with regard to security and force protection in place? We talked about this on the 7th, about those concentric rings of security, recognizing there's a line of demarcation. What are they going to do when that line is breached, and how are they going to protect? So it still has that same appearance I mentioned on the 7th, that it was either incredibly inept planning, or there was a lack of planning for purpose. And when we look at that, when we look at the sergeant at arms, politically appointed positions, and when you have that kind of political influence in the security of a building, an institution like the Capitol, when you interject the constituencies' wants, desires with regard to security, then you've weakened that security structure.
One of the extraordinary things we learned last week was one of the members of Congress, and there are several who are now kind of being questioned, but one of the members of Congress actually wore body armor to the Capitol that day. That says a lot, doesn't it, to an investigator?
It says a lot, and his rhetoric was clear, and it was meant to incite. And also hearkening back to the 7th, I also said that I didn't believe that the rioters actually believed they would be in the Capitol that day. And now in hindsight, I recognize that was wrong, because they surely believed they were going to be in the Capitol with the bear spray, the mace, the tools that they brought, the equipment they brought. They clearly understood they were going to have an opportunity to charge the Capitol and actually breach the Capitol security and get into the Capitol. When you have somebody in leadership that's standing out there and is actually wearing a ballistic undergarment and inciting the crowd, I mean, it's just really hard to understand that type of mentality.
I think even the Democrats have said it's unfortunate that they have to do this with a House commission and not a full independent commission like the 9/11 Commission. How will that make a difference as we go forward?
Well, I mean, it's going to be, when we look back to the previous administration and their aversion to subpoenas and complying with subpoenas, I mean, we're going to see that same kind of stonewalling, and we're going to see that same type of rigorous defense against finding the truth. And in this case, it's so critical that we find the truth. I mean, are we looking at probably a combination of things, criminality and performance? And when we start looking at healing that performance and recognizing that we've got to make those performance adjustments, whether it's in organizational structure, mission, training, hiring, retention, recruitment, communication, all of those things we've got to look at, so that the things that are broken we can fix, the things that are in place and working that we can enhance.
Moving this to the landscape of tribal governments, we know that tribes are often at risk from some of the same elements. We saw this in several cases in Nevada. What should tribes be thinking about in terms of security going forward?
It has to be a total reexamination, and it has to be, again, and I always talk about threat, risk, and vulnerability. Threat being the thing that can cause us harm, can do harm. Risk, the likelihood of that happening, and the vulnerability is the gap or opening that allows it. We've got to really examine the threats that are out there. And when we saw the hatred that day on January 6th, that intense hatred, and I mentioned on the 7th, when we get in those sites, then the danger is real, and And I mean, we've got to be examining what we are doing in a whole host of things, including cybersecurity right now.
And it's amazing, and we have about 30 seconds left, but to me, one of the lines is many of us are willing to die for a cause, but how many are willing to kill for a cause? And that really is what we saw.
And absolutely. And it's that kind of intense, deep-seated hatred that we have to be aware, be on our awares, and be concerned and worried about, because it's that kind of hatred that takes lives.
Walter Lamar, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate being here.
And we'll be right back with Billy Mills. It's one of the greatest moments in Olympic history. The year was 1964. The place, Tokyo, Japan. And the runner, Billy Mills. He was not even considered a medalist candidate for the 10,000 meter race, but he surged in the last lap to capture the gold. Nearly 60 years later, he remains the only American to ever win the gold in this race. Billy Mills joins us today to talk about that historic moment and the race that was held Friday night in Tokyo. Welcome, Billy.
Yes, great to be with you.
Well, let's start. You got up very early to watch the 10,000 meter race this year. Tell us about that.
It was very difficult running, but I was thrilled with our young runner, Fisher, who got fifth. I actually thought he had a chance to pick up a medal, and I thought he ran just a very intelligent race.
Well, it's interesting how close he was after that long a distance.
Well, yes, Fisher was close, and I think he could have gotten third. He ran a very, very intelligent race. And I'm just going to take a risk here. We have some very strong distance runners at these Olympic Games, and probably the strongest would be among our young female distance runners. We could win a gold, we could win a bronze and a silver in the various distance races, and we potentially could win more than one gold with the women.
Billy, I'm going to go back and talk about what went through your mind and how it compared to when you ran. And I know you mentioned how the runners hit a wall, and I know you've talked about how powerful that wall is when you're running.
If there was a wall to be hit, for me, it was coming off the curve with 110 meters to go when I was going low blood sugar and feeling that tingling sensation of low blood sugar, the sticky sweat, not the flowing sweat of exercise. So I was going low blood sugar coming off the curve. And what saved me, Patricia was 14 rows up, 3 seats in from the aisle, 95 meters from the finish line. And at that point, I saw another runner with an eagle on his singlet. And it reminded me of my dad when my mom died, and my dad saying, "Son, you have broken wings." And it takes a dream to heal broken wings. Later, just facing the racism of America, I broke, and then was so close to suicide and a junior in college. And remember my dad saying it takes a dream to heal broken wings. I wrote down the dream, gold medal Olympic 10,000 meter run, not to become a gold medalist, but to heal a broken soul. And that was my race. There's 100 meters to go. Just one more try. Then I may be this close. I may never be this close again. I've got to do it now. Then I'm going to win, but I may not get to the finish line first. So was I contradicting myself? Then lifting my knees, lengthening my stride, pumping my arms, feeling the tape breaking across my chest. An official coming up to me and simply saying, "Who are you? Who are you?" And I go, "Oh my God, did I miscount the laps?" And he says, "New Olympic champion. Is there anything we can do for you?" And I said, "I need my wife." I told him where Patricia was sitting. Within moments, they're tapping her on the shoulder. "Mrs. Mills, the new Olympic champion, wants his wife." Patricia came down and we hugged her. She told me what they said, and it was just emotional. I found the runner that had the eagle on his singlet. There was no eagle. It was simply a perception. And then it was like I'm going to win meant I was going to heal a broken soul. And in the process, I just may become an Olympic gold medalist. So I don't know how many Olympians have experienced maybe similar circumstances, but mine was extremely sacred, just extremely emotional. And my training was based on the virtues and the values of the Lakota culture, taking the virtues and values from culture, tradition, spirituality, and trying to live those daily as I pursued healing a broken soul.
How is that as a narrative for young Native people, and how should they look at the Olympic movement in a broader sense?
You know, that the story that I think would be for youth is the Japanese youth born on the day of the atomic bombs being dropped to the day of the opening ceremonies, 1964. The leadership wanted the young youth, the youth of Japan, the youth of the world, to see the world as one. Now, our Lakota prayer, we are all related, helped me see the world as one. And that's where I took global unity through the dignity, character, beauty of global diversity, the future of humankind. One final connection there. Some of the elders on the reservation at the time, Oliver Red Cloud, I get a little emotion here. Oliver Red Cloud took the pipe and he prayed to the four directions. Not that I would win, but that I could represent myself. I could humble myself, rent myself with our virtues and values, so I could honor my family, my tribal nation, and the United States of America. Then he reminded me of the Black Hills, the heart of everything that is. So as I fly into Tokyo, Japan, before the race, and I look out the window, and I saw Mount Fuji, and just on a spiritual way, it was, this must be the heart of everything that is to the Japanese. And I was trying to climb Mount Olympus. Why? For many reasons, but because one of the greatest athletes of all time, who to me is an Olympic god, and that's where he dwells, about atop Mount Everest, and that's not atop Mount Olympus, and that's Jim Thorpe. I think Jim Thorpe was not a hero of mine, he was more of a god, and I just felt the opportunity to maybe in some way rub shoulders with Jim Thorpe through my Olympic experience. So I would say we're all related. I would say see the world as one, global unity through the dignity, character, beauty of global diversity, and our youth will play a major role in choreographing the horizon of America's future, choreographing how we fit in to this great democratic experiment.
This Olympic season has a number of Indigenous athletes and another gold medal winner in surfing. Does that bring a great deal of pride to you?
Oh, absolutely. There's just an inherent connection. I followed many other countries had a number of Indigenous people on their Olympic teams. So when I watched her make that break and come on and off that wave, it was so empowering. Then watching the male Indigenous person give thanks to the water, to the ocean, to the waves. They gave him a challenge, but one he could not overcome. So I identify so powerfully, and if I could say one other thing to the youth, I think we need to learn more about our virtues and values. We need to learn how they fit into the world today. For example, I took as a young boy, combined the virtue of honesty and truth, and they're combined. And I would love our youth, particularly Indigenous youth, to understand the difference, their virtues and values. But America, our leadership, misuses them. So for example, honesty. You hear that constantly among our leaders, elected officials. Honesty is expressing your feelings and your opinions accurately, even though your feelings and your opinions may not accurately represent the truth. Some of our leaders, elected officials of the US government, use honesty, honestly speaking their feelings and their opinions, to deceive, to misdirect. Now let's take the Lakota concept of truth. Truth is an accurate representation of whatever you honestly expressed. So I encourage constantly, when I have opportunities to commute with our youth, to learn the difference between honesty and truth, and speak the truth as we choreograph, and they help choreograph our future in this great democratic experiment. The greatest gift my sports career has brought me was love of friendship, respect of other cultures, other societies, and believing together we truly can create the horizon of humanity's future.
Thank you so much, Billy.
Thank you.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. We'll be back with another edition tomorrow. I'm Mark Trahant.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run. Standing rock. This is Indian Country Today.